those companies are moving slower and they're choosing to move slower. If we are successful at Ping, I'll have to hire someone like Primeagen to come in. And at this point, you're choosing to increase your costs significantly. Most developers don't realize how expensive their work is. Do you really need Kubernetes? I don't mean that in like a harmful or negative type of way. I mean, seriously, do you? I find that a lot of companies are using Kubernetes because they think they have a complex infrastructure problem, and often they don't. They have a scalability problem. And by introducing Kubernetes, they're introducing infrastructure that has its own complicated rollouts, architecture, and things to consider. It is a great solution for a lot of problems. And if you're trying to manage and deploy a bunch of servers at once, Kubernetes is hard to beat. I want to be clear here. I'm not saying Kubernetes is bad. I'm saying the mindset of every problem is a Kubernetes problem is harmful. I think Lambda and the magic of serverless function deployments through things like AWS, as well as edge deployments with Cloudflare and all of these new options appearing like Google Cloud Run, allow us to think about our code less as an infrastructure problem and more as a code and piping problem. Kubernetes introduces a lot of complex infrastructure to consider and think about as you're building your applications. And I don't think everyone needs to be considering those things. Honestly, and this is one of the most common problems I see, is a bunch of engineers come from a FANG company. Like they used to work at Facebook and now they're making a startup. So they assume because everything they've ever built is in this crazy like Kubernetes cluster, that they're going to have to keep doing that at their tiny little startup. And that's when I see these 4-person companies with no customers starting to hire infra engineers and like developer experience experts and teams to get them out of the hell they've created themselves by assuming they need to own all of these things. So a message I see a lot in my chat is, should I learn Kubernetes, or how do I learn Kubernetes? I want to be an infra wizard. I want this to be the thing I do. I want to go understand infrastructure. Or even simpler, like, hey, I'm building a side project. How do I set up Kubernetes for it? You probably don't need Kubernetes for your side project, but you might need Kubernetes for complex like structure problems with your infrastructure, if you have infrastructure. But what I try to recommend and push for is that you avoid adding infrastructure as much as you can. The less infrastructure, the easier it is to manage your application, the easier it is to build, iterate, and find product market fit with the things that you're building. Kubernetes is another one of those tools that by design is meant to slow you down. That is good if the problems you have need you to slow down and think about them. But if you're just taking things from a database and trying to render them on the client, Kubernetes is making that way more complex than it needs to be. That's just the reality of how infrastructure technologies work. It's hard. Kubernetes is one of those things where you don't set it up and it's done. Kubernetes is one of those things that is now part of your business. You have to think about it. You have to build around it. You have to plan for it. And if you don't have a plan yet and you don't have the money to build that plan, you should be building around not needing Kubernetes. There are very few problems that can't be shaped as a serverless problem with enough effort. There's a lot that can't, like WebSockets. Those are very hard to run in a Lambda because you need a persistent, stateful connection running on a server. I think a lot of those things can be outsourced to other companies. I think that solutions like Pusher, Ably, PubNub are all great. We also have new ones like LiveBlocks and Hop appearing too. Those allow you to not be thinking about infrastructure and not needing to bring in Kubernetes. What about your data? How do I scale my database? Please don't put your database in Kubernetes unless you really know what you're doing. And even then, be very careful with it. Databases are a scary thing to put under automatic, whatever, because automatic means stuff is being created and deleted. You might accidentally have the wrong thing get deleted, and then you lose a database that hasn't replicated yet. Kubernetes is a scary place to put your database. So with all that, what's left? I'm a big company with a bunch of infrastructure that really wants a simple, like, codified way of deploying that infrastructure. Sure, Kubernetes and Terraform are good solutions for that. But the vast majority of problems are not Terraform or Kubernetes problems. They are software problems that we can solve in other ways. And generally speaking, if you don't have a team that is deep in Kubernetes and deep in these things yet, you should try to avoid them as much as you can. Generally speaking, Kubernetes should be the last thing you reach for rather than the first. It is scary. It is one of those solutions that comes with a lot of debt that you are eating. And if that doesn't provide a solution to a harder problem for you, you should probably pay someone else for their solution. If you need a database that scales, check out PlanetScale. They run the Kubernetes for you. If you need WebSockets that scale, check out Pusher. They have the Kubernetes for you. If you need auth that scales, check out anything that lets you deploy it on serverless functions. And if you don't want to own it, check out all of the third-party authentication solutions that scale totally fine as well. All of the things that I see people reaching for Kubernetes for to like automatically spin up all of these boxes for all of these things, half of them are things you should probably be paying someone else for. Half of them are things a Lambda could do. And maybe there's one or two where it's like, okay, fine, you should spin up a server for that. But it ends up being like one tiny box that doesn't even need Kubernetes often. It just needs a single like Docker file thrown on an RDS instance because it's used to run cron jobs. Generally, I want to be clear, this is very general. If you're disagreeing in the comments adamantly, it's because you're in that small group solving these other problems. There are great use cases for Kubernetes. I think we need to stop turning everything into a use case for Kubernetes though. And on top of that, let the experts build and pay them for their work. People are saying Pusher is expensive. Do you know what's more expensive? Hiring 4 engineers to manage the clusters of your like Kubernetes deployments, trying to keep your WebSockets up and synchronizing state between each other. That is very expensive. Each of those engineers is going to be at least $200,000 a year. And until your business is spending enough on Pusher to compete with that, you should be paying Pusher to do that. Because the cost of engineers who know how to use Kubernetes and know how to deploy these things is significantly higher than paying someone else who already hired those engineers to use their services. I see somebody in chat mentioning that companies are allergic to vendors, so they use Kubernetes instead. Those companies are moving slower, and they're choosing to move slower and spend more money to move at all. One of the advantages more clued-in people have is they don't have to do that. We don't have those strongly held beliefs that everything should be on our VPS, everything should be hosted by our engineers in our Kubernetes clusters. We being companies that aren't one of the big five, like anybody who isn't Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, or Microsoft, we should not be playing by the same rules they hold themselves to, because those services, they have infinite money, effectively. And what they're doing is survivable because of their infinite money. We don't. But what we do have is more knowledge, more flexibility, more agility. And that's how we see these smaller companies challenging these monoliths, because they reject the belief that since Google used Kubernetes, we have to as well. It's more, since Google is using Kubernetes, we can move faster than them because they can never move faster than their infrastructure allows. We can do whatever we want. That is powerful. That is what makes startups successful, is the ability to move in ways bigger companies cannot. That's what makes anything other than bigger companies powerful. And hell, that's what makes small teams at big companies powerful too. When I was at Twitch, we ran our own full stack for our marathon stuff because the stack at Twitch did not work well for what we were building. Eventually, we flattened that into the Twitch stack once the Amazon acquisition went through and everybody's moving to AWS. But for a long time, we went out of our way to run our own parallel stacks like a mini startup within Twitch. I think that's a huge part of why we could move so fast and build the crazy things that we built. I very strongly believe that smaller teams that own their ways of doing things, that aren't being told you have to use something as big and heavy as Kubernetes, you can build in the way that makes you move the fastest. It'll let you find product market fit much faster and much more securely. If you invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in Kubernetes infrastructure and it turns out you built the wrong product, even if you're at Google's size, your team can't easily move to the right product because you've invested so heavily in this particular thing you've built. And that sunk cost sucks. And the more you can reduce it as you find product market fit, the better. If eventually you're at a point where the product's making so much money, where all of the cost is going to these third-party vendors because you're not using Kubernetes locally, like let's say you're spending $2 million a year on third-party infrastructure, and if you hosted it yourself, it would be $100,000 a year. Cool. That gives you $1.8 million to spend on engineers to lower that cost. And at that point, you do it. But very, very few companies are at that point where they have $2 million plus a year of spend on third-party services without way too early moving things over to something like Kubernetes. I say this a lot too. If we are successful at Ping, I'll have to hire someone like Primeagen to come in and unscrew all of our bad, slow, serverless function JavaScript code and make that something more performant, more scalable, just generally cheaper. But the cost there isn't the infrastructure. The cost there is Primeagen. Hiring Primeagen right now would double the company's monthly spend. And that's not realistic for us. That hopefully wouldn't be realistic for most companies, is that huge cost until you are spending enough on your infrastructure to justify that. That crossing point is rare. And I feel like a lot of engineers don't see it because they don't think in that way. I'm realizing now we do have the diagram, which means I have to hide the overlays, hop into Excalidraw, and we're going to draw the company success curve. And here's a company succeeding. I just realized that's doing the hard stops. Let's switch that to be the curves. Yep, here comes the hockey stick, as a bunch of people are saying in chat. Correct. Here is a random theoretical company trajectory. This is a company that's like growing and then suddenly is growing exponentially. You succeed, you're doing okay, doing better, better, better. Suddenly it starts to ramp up and it goes nuts here. There's a point here where, let's say, so this green line, this is the money coming in. Let's draw cost. So this red line is how much our service costs us to run. We'll say that the baseline is cheaper, but like it starts here. It's going to be more expensive. But as users go up, the cost goes up significantly. We'll call this I have a good name for this. We'll call this the Firebase curve, where it starts out reasonable. We can even start lower if we want to, where it starts because their free tier is so generous. And what happens here is as our user base grows and our income grows, the cost grows too fast. So I'm going to put another line in here, and we're going to call this line the line of Prime. This line is how much money Primeagen costs. You'll notice it takes a while to get to the point where this Firebase curve costs as much as a Primeagen, at which point, and I'll copy paste this below, the expectation would be you hire Prime, he forces you to, can I delete like points in this easily enough? I don't know if that's an option. I can, maybe. I make new points. No, I probably can't. Whatever. We'll say it goes like this. And then when Primeagen joins, you're able to lower your infrastructure costs significantly in order to turn this profit into a bigger profit. The specific point I'm trying to make here is curve this spend when your income is high enough and your like users coming in are high enough that not hiring this person makes it too expensive. Because right when you hire Prime, I should probably actually document this part, your costs actually go up a whole bunch. So we'll call this the point of Prime when you hire Primeagen. And at this point, you're choosing to increase your costs significantly, knowing that if this was a good hire, it will go down significantly, ideally pretty soon. Technically, actually, I should be clear about this. You can't go lower than the point of Prime. You can never beat out how much like he's cost and how much money you're paying him. So your actual like cost is going to go down, but it can't go below where he is. You've set a new bar. When you're not using a Primeagen, you don't have a super like infrastructure and optimized focus engineer, your baseline can flex a lot lower. Firebase's free tier is absurd. When you hire people like this, you're increasing the amount of money your company is going to spend every month, guaranteed. You're raising this floor up. If by raising that floor, you can lower the ceiling, it's worth it. If the time you're spending is closer to the ceiling than it is to the floor. When you hire someone like Prime, you are reducing how much spend you theoretically can do, but you're increasing how much spend you absolutely have to do. And those increases suck for your business. And if you're trying to build a sustainable business, you have to be very careful about when you make those decisions. The problem that I see a lot of engineers running into is they're not thinking in terms of business. And when they are, they're thinking of their labor as free. Most developers don't realize how expensive their work is day to day. And they'll think, oh, but I've set up 15 Kubernetes deployments. It won't be that much work. I'll go set it up. It'll take me a few hours. But then you're dealing with it for 5 hours a week every week. And that's productivity time I'm losing as your boss. That's context shifting that you're doing all of the time. That ends up making it closer to 10 to 12 hours of productivity I'm losing every week from you, a very expensive engineer, now focus on this deployment. So it's so important to recognize your own bias of, but this thing would be simple for me to go do quick. And recognize for you and people like you, sure, but you and people like you are expensive. And you have to be responsible when you're running a business. Yeah, this content's important. And I want to talk more about like tech decisions, not just as like which technologies I like, so much as how these things affect your businesses, the things you're building, and how they get to product market fit and succeed. Those are the conversations that I don't think we have enough in the tech space. We're thinking too much about what the coolest and most fun stuff is and what makes us proud of our work as engineers, not about how the work we do as engineers brings value and delivers it. And I want to be more considerate of those things. The proliferation of third-party services has allowed us to build things faster in a more agile way and find product market fit faster. But you do have to be considerate of how expensive like those services get and make sure you find the right point to hire engineers and move you off of those things. That all said, that point is further along than you probably think. This is going to suck to stitch up. Probably should have planned this rant ahead a bit better. Shout out to Limit and to Des for all of the hard work in editing these longer form videos, as well as Mir, who's been killing it on the shorts lately. I don't give y'all enough love. You guys are working really hard to make this channel viable. Appreciate you guys immensely. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you like and subscribe if you have not already, and leave a comment letting me know you made it this far in the video. Super appreciate all of you guys, especially if you're here for the more businessy content, although I clickbaited you with the Kubernetes. I know that. It's the only way you're ever going to watch my shit. Thank y'all.